Okay, yeah. Thanks, Henrik. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Based on that, what region that you are in. Like Henrik was saying, this is my third presentation, and I'm always happy to present in this Allied forum. It gives a lot of opportunities to exchange ideas, get the info, and then get to know what is happening across the globe. So thanks, Henrik and Neotys team for giving us this platform to share our ideas and thoughts. Right? So today I think I'm going to talk about non-functional requirements. NFR has been one of the key things, and it's the basis for any performance testing and engineering activity. Right? Often when we speak to clients, we run into challenges. Right? They don't have the right NFRs, and the entire testing goes for a toss. Right? So it's very critical to understand what is an NFR, what are the different types of NFRs that we have, what are the key areas within NFRs, what are the different levels of NFRs, and how do you define some of these NFRs? Right? What are the attributes for a smart NFR? How do you define them? How do we manage them? So that when we test some of these applications, we test it against the right NFRs. Right? So that's been the whole agenda for this pack. So I'll probably start with the quick definition of NFR. Right? I think most of us are aware about the functional as well as the non-functional requirements. Right? The functional requirements predominantly focuses on what the system must do right to accomplish a business function, whereas NFR is predominantly focused on how will the system must do its function within the known constraints. Right? It has a direct impact on the user experience or user expectations. With that, functional requirements is probably easy to define, easy to test. But when it comes to non-functional requirements, it's a bit complicated, right? You need to define parameters which measures the end experience. It can be as easy as your response time. It also talks about usability and some of the other aspects, right? So without the right stakeholders, right methodology, sometimes NFRs are flawed. Which results in the applications not having the right set of NFRs, right? And which also have a lot of implications from an application standpoint. So it's very critical right, when we talk about some of those implications, the driving forces right behind NFRs rise. Today, if you look into it, any digital application, with COVID and post-COVID, number of users who are going to access the application through digital channels has increased dramatically. And from a CAO standpoint, the competition has increased, and there is a need for faster innovations to take quality back to the market within a short duration of time. Right, the gone are the days where we used to have the waterfall model, where we have 4 months, 3 months to take a product to the customer. Right now, customer needs the product within a week, within 2 weeks. New feature needs to be shipped in at a faster rate, so that the business is able to retain the customers and then also expand their business with new customers. So that's one of the critical factors when you look from a CAU's priority. The second key aspect is on the technology aspect. Today, it's also very critical not just providing a quality product with the functionalities, but it's also very critical that the applications are resilient and that's secure. Right? If you look into the technology, it is very complex, and people have migrated from monolithic applications to microservices architecture. Right? Where we just had 3 different boxes. Today, if you look into microservices, there are n number of components that are available in a microservices architecture. With IoT, the entire ecosystem has changed. Right, there are multiple end user touch points, and it's very critical that the CEO or from an application owner standpoint, it's very critical that they provide consistent user experience across multiple end user touch points, and also ensure that the application that they have is secure as well as resilient. Right? I think some of the stats are very interesting. Right? A 1 second delay in loading a web page will result in at least 7% reduction in conversion rate, right, for some of the e-commerce applications. And probably the cost of downtime, if you look into some of these statistics, the cost of downtime for an average application is somewhere around 100,000 to 150,000 US dollars per minute, right? And it is increasing. So the CAOs can't afford to have their application down. it needs to be up and running, right? And that's one of the key aspects. The third key aspect is on the social forces of providing superior customer experience, right? I think it's been the need of the hour, right? People wanted to have best performing applications which are safe, secure, available throughout the journey, right? And if there are any disruptions, the page takes more than 2 seconds to load, or if the application is down, they immediately take it to the social media, right? And it has a direct impact on the brand reputation. Customers will easily switch to another alternate vendor, right? So there is a brand reputation at stake. There is a loss of customers, revenue at stake if the application is not available, and it's also very critical that you need to build and take applications faster time to market. So today, if you look into it, NFR plays a key role in helping the CIOs achieve all these three things, right? If you have the right NFRs, it helps them to achieve all these three key aspects. But when you look into NFRs, probably before we get into the details, when you look into NFRs, there are probably classified into outside of functionality, right? More from a performance standpoint, they are broadly classified into 7 areas, right? Performance and efficiency is the one primary area. I think the objective here is to validate how fast the system responds, right? And will the system be able to handle additional workload without any challenges, right? So those are the key things that is probably covered under performance and efficiency. The second key NFR component is on the availability, reliability and availability, right? So how immune is the system to failures, right? And will the application be available during my normal business hours? Some of the key things that will be addressed as part of the reliability and availability NFRs components, right? So from an NFR standpoint, these are the two basic things that would be required for any performance tester or an engineer to address. While there are other NFRs, I think the other prominent NFRs are security. I think given the current focus on providing secure application, security is also one of the key things that needs to be addressed, right? Is my system and data protected against all the threats? With cloud, with mobile, it's also very critical that it's not just providing a faster application. The application also need to be secure and safer, right? And that's also one of the key NFR that is catching up, and it's also one of the primary focus. The next one is on the usability aspect of it. Usability is again on how easy it is to use the application, right? So this is again one of the key components from an NFR standpoint. And given the rise of post-COVID, most of the users are accessing the application through digital channels, right? Be it bank, be it retail application, be it insurance application. Everyone is trying to access through the channels. And you have a mix of users, right? You have the next gen kids all the way to old senior citizens who will be accessing the application, right? So it's also very critical that the application is accessible to different sets of people, and it also provides consistent user experience for all those different users, right? That's one of the key aspects when it comes to usability, right? Providing application which is easy to use for all the users, right? Not just to a specific set of users. So that's also another key NFR that needs to be focused on. And more from an application standpoint, there are two key things, right? One is on portability and compatibility of the application, and two is on the maintainability of the application, right? How easy it is to upkeep, repair the application or maintain the application, or how easy it is to move the application from probably one cloud provider to another cloud provider, right? Or how do we make changes to the architecture on the fly, right? So portability and compatibility is also one of the other key things that is that needs to be focused on. So to summarize, I think from an NFR standpoint, there are 8 broad categories, but more from a performance engineer standpoint, focus will be predominantly on performance and efficiency, reliability and availability. And today, security is also taking a stage, and there are a lot of focus that performance and security should also be taken forward together, right? But for today's discussion, we'll focus predominantly on performance and efficiency and reliability and availability aspects of the NFRs. When we talk about NFRs, right, broadly, NFRs comes from different teams, different stakeholders, right? And the first source of information is always business NFRs, right? And business is the primary team who defines what they want for that application that is getting built. Right? Business gets the expectation or sets the right set of NFRs. They give they are the primary source, and they give the information from an application standpoint. What are those business NFRs, right? And it's very critical that this is one of the area where we don't get the right set of business NFRs. Most of them are not properly defined, and the business analyst doesn't have the right set of skill set to define the NFRs. Right? As a performance engineer or a performance consultant, we need to work along with the business, educate them, and then give them options to see how to get the right NFRs or define the right business NFRs. Right? And primarily, if you look into it, where business NFRs from a source standpoint, I think predominantly, if it is an existing application, the source can be any of your analytics, like Google Analytics can be one source from where you'll be able to get this information. We can leverage synthetic monitoring tools or real user monitoring tools to get insights on how the application is performing in production, how diverse the end users are, what are the different devices that they use to access the application, right? What percentage of the users use mobile. Within mobile, it will be easy to find out what percentage are using Android, what percentage are using iOS. All those critical insights, right, we'll be able to gather from some of these tools. And it's also critical to understand what is the peak day looks like, and within a peak day, what is a peak hour looks like, what are the business critical functions that have been performed during that time. And these are some of these insights which we need to provide to the business team so that they can use this data to help and derive the right NFRs. In addition, I think if there is going to be a new application, then it's also good to get some of the industry benchmarks for similar applications and see how that can be leveraged to define the right set of NFRs. Once we have the business NFRs, it's very critical to break it down to the level that it can be leveraged or validated and tested from an application standpoint. Right. So business NFR, once we get the business NFRs, the next step is to convert those business NFRs into application NFRs. Right. So this is exactly where you'll be able to break down the business NFRs into application specific NFRs. It can be at the technology level or it can be at the infrastructure level. Break down those application level business NFRs into application NFRs so that it will be easy for the architects and the developers to consume and use that data for developing or architecting the application. Right? And if you look into the primary source of the application NFRs, is predominantly the APM tools, which is deployed in the production, which gets all these critical metrics about the application performance, right? What business transactions are processed, and for each of the components, right? What is the number of requests that a specific microservice has processed or a specific component has processed? What was the response time it took to process the request? How many connections were there? What is the JVM heap size? What is the database pool size? And how it was consumed in production for a normal day, for a peak day. So some of these data will be pulled back from the APM tools, and it acts as the primary source for the architects and the developers to see if something needs to be changed or refined for any of the, if they are making any changes to the application or if they are building new application. These insights will help them to derive the application NFRs, right? And once we have the application NFRs, it will be easy to break down to the component level NFRs, right? So probably an application NFR will talk about an end-to-end business process, but within a business process, you will have multiple components, right? If you have login as an example, the high-level view would be a login should be processed within 3 seconds or 4 seconds might be an NFR that you have. But it's also critical to break down that specific login NFR into multiple components, right? So what is the time it takes for the UI to process? What is the time it takes for the web server or for your service to process? What is the time it should take for the database to process, right? So your 4-second or a 3-second SLA will be broken down into multiple components, one at a UI layer, two at a network layer, three at your web server or an app server layer, 4, the time it takes for a service to process the request, 5, the time it takes for the database to process or validate the user ID and password, and then send the data back to it, right? So the component level NFRs will help us to break down the application NFRs into each of these individual components, and then define what should be the NFR for in each of those individual areas. It is predominantly a service level SLIs is what is getting defined as part of the component NFRs, and this is predominantly used by the developers to validate during their unit level testing, or to ensure that whenever they build a new component, it will help them to validate whether each of those components meets the NFR at a component level. If you look at the source of this information, predominantly again APM tools are heavily used to get this information. And in the previous session, when like Harinder mentioned, there is also a lot of native monitoring tools which are used today to get to the level of information. Right? With the observability in place, it's also very critical to break down these NFRs, get the data from different tools. Right, so native monitoring tools is also widely used. Instrumentation is used to capture some of these metrics, and there is also an enterprise level SLAs and SLAs which are defined. Right, for any large enterprises, they also define what should be the SLA for a single microservice, or what should be the service, what should be the response time for a database call, or how long it takes for a UI component to load. So there are enterprise level SLAs also defined. So if it is a new application, new service that is getting developed, then it can be the enterprise SLAs can be leveraged. For existing application, I think the existing APM tools will be a good source of truth to get insights about each of those individual layers. So one of the key thing is when we talk about NFRs, it needs to be smart data. The NFRs needs to be precise, and it needs to be actionable as well. Right? Otherwise, a vague NFR will not help us to do the right set of strategy, and will not be able to validate and certify the application. Right. So one of the key thing is when we talk to the business, when we talk to the architect, I think it's also very critical to work with them and then help them and define a smart NFR. Right, and a smart NFR should be it should be specific. We should be able to. It's very clear for performance testers, engineers to understand. It's also clear for the business stakeholders to understand what they expect for this application, and what we are going to validate, and what is the output that we are going to showcase. Right? So it's very specific. It's measurable. So each of the NFR, we have the right set of tools to monitor and measure the metric, and it's also actionable. Right? It's also the NFR needs to be detailed out, so that we can take action against the NFR when something goes wrong, right? And some of the other key things is also should be technically feasible to validate the NFR. It should be realizable, and it should also be traceable, right? One of the key things is how do you trace back on where the NFR came from. Often when we get into client engagements, right, when we have an NFR in place, when things go wrong, I think when things go right, there is no issue to trace back and identify the issue. Right? But when something goes wrong, it's very critical to understand who defined the NFR, who signed up for the NFR. So it's very critical to trace that data back either to the business give the right set of data. Right, and the architects will be able to break down the business NFRs, devise the right set of application or technical NFRs, right? And then how do we validate it in each of those stages? So if something goes wrong, we'll be able to go back, find where it went wrong, so that it's also easy that from next time onwards the same issue is the issue is fixed and minimized, right? And then we have a clean thing. From an overall NFR standpoint. So to summarize, I think NFR needs to be smart, so that it's easy to define, test, and validate. Right, and this is one of the critical aspects for NFR. So from an end-to-end management standpoint, I think we spoke about the key areas, key components, and some of the key aspects. Right? I think from a overall management strategy standpoint, we start with the NFR identification, and the primary source for NFRs, like we discussed in the previous slide, it comes from production. Right, production is the single source of truth from where you will be able to get all the right set of NFRs for all the past events that has happened, right? And it's very critical that we leverage that data, work with the team to define and to understand the business goals, define and document all the business level NFRs, right? And typically, when it comes to defining the NFR, often we don't have the right set of stakeholders involved. Most of the time, performance architects are not part of the discussions. Business gives some data, and then architects takes the data. I think they focus more on functional requirements. NFRs are not given the right amount of priority in most of the engagements or most of the projects. Right? So it's very critical that we have the right stakeholders when we define the functional requirement as well as the non-functional requirements. We have the performance architect, the application architect, along with the operations lead, working along with the business to define what that NFR should be from for the business standpoint, right? And then also help the business to define it in a smart way, right? And decompose that business NFR into technical NFRs. Again, here architects will play the key role, right? Working along with the performance architect, application architects take the initial role to break down the business NFR into the application or component or infrastructure NFRs. He works along with he takes support from the performance architect to define or break down the NFRs, and the development leads and business stakeholders should be involved to create, validate, and set and sign off for those business NFRs. And the dev lead should also be comfortable to take that NFR implemented in their application. Right? So this is one of the key things. And again, when it comes to infrastructure NFRs, there are very specific infrastructure NFRs that the operations team should be aware of. So that they take this data, validate and certify that yes, the current infrastructure can handle the volume or the changes that we are proposing as part of the new change or new feature that is being added. The third aspect is where the end-to-end certification happens. This is where we get involved from a performance testing or an engineering standpoint, right? Where we do the different types of tests that are required for validating the NFRs. So the performance tests, like volume, spike, all those different types of tests are executed based on the NFRs that we have gathered, and certify the application and ensure that the application meets all those NFRs. If there are challenges, document and highlight the key miss in the application, or what is the deviation that we see. Right? Often business says if the response time is increased from 2 seconds to 3 seconds, they are most probably okay. But if there is an end-to-end volume standpoint, if the application is not able to meet the projected volume, then they normally don't approve the release to production. Right? So there are a few NFRs where business will be okay for deviation, and there are a few NFRs where there will be absolutely zero deviation. And that's one of the key things. If all these data is captured as part of the smart NFR process, we also know what is the acceptable limits. When we move into a yellow zone or into a red zone, and red zone is usually a no-go decision, right? And the application needs to be validated, fixed if it is either a code-related issue or a architecture-related issue, or any of those things needs to be or an infrastructure-related issue needs to be identified and fixed before it moves into production. So this is one of the critical phase where from a performance tester or engineer gets involved, executes the different tests and then certifies it, right? And I think most of the places, once the application gets into production, we take the hands-on NFR, but it's also very critical to continuously track these NFR and refine these NFR on an ongoing basis. So it's also recommended to have a real-time tracking of the NFRs in production, identify what is it we are seeing in production, what is that we have tested in the environment, what is that we have captured. If there are any gaps, make those changes so that we often test what we see in production. Right? So this is one of the key things. And it's also critical that often business team runs a lot of campaigns. So it's also very critical to understand what the performance, be it a holiday readiness or a strong readiness, right? What is the performance on those specific campaign days or on holiday readiness or on some of those peak days? Capture those data, store it in the repository so that it can be used when we discuss for the next holiday readiness or for the next season. These NFRs will come in handy to see what happened in the previous year, how many users were there, when was the peak time, when was the peak hour, how many transactions were processed. Will give some good insights for the subsequent releases. Right? So it's also very critical, not just defining it in the first place and then validating it. It's also very critical to continuously track the NFRs, monitor the data from production, and then have a repository to store those information and use it for future releases. And predominantly, when it comes to production, I think Ops lead takes the lead with the SRE coming in. The operations lead, the SRE will be responsible for tracking these NFRs, tracking the data from production, feeding it back to the business team so that this will help us to validate and certify the end-to-end NFRs. Right? So this is more like a strategy that needs to be adopted for defining, validating, and then continuously improving the overall NFRs. I think to summarize, NFRs plays a key role, right, in the often beat for any organization or for any CIO. It's very critical to ensure that the application meets both the business goals as well as the application takes care of some of the technology-related issues as well. Right? So if we have the right set of NFRs, the right set of smart NFRs, often it results in increased business growth. A better, faster performing application will help us to acquire new customers. And if the NFRs are defined, and it's also very easy to validate, test. So it also increases the application faster time to market. Right, is one of the key things where we have all the NFRs well documented and used. It helps to validate and certify the application. So it helps in taking the application faster to the market. And it also provides a lot of business confidence because business is involved in each and every stage of the application development process, so they get the right set of confidence to take the application into production. So it helps if you have the right NFRs, it increases the overall sales, it increases the customer. But from a technology standpoint, if you validate it, I think it improves the overall performance of the application. The response times will be validated, and it improves the overall customer experience from an availability, scalability, and the stability of the system. Right? The NFRs helps us to ensure that the application is available to the NFRs that it has been defined. It's stable without any major challenges, and it's also scalable for any future demands. Right? So that's a key thing. So right set of NFRs, a smart NFR, will help us aid both in increasing the sales, improving the overall customer experience, as well as improving the overall platform and infrastructure. So that's a key thing that I want to cover in today's session. I'll probably take a few questions, Henrik.
All right. Thanks so much, Harry, for your presentation. I'm just going to enable all the various webcams and mics from the various pack members connected. Now, up. And we're going to up. Oh, there's some echo. Oh, yeah. Okay, that's much better. Hi, Emma. How are you? Hi, Ranga.
Good.
How are you? Good. So I have one question, Harry. I would like to start the Q&A with one of my questions is, so I think you make the point you have to connect the requirements at early stage, and I really like the approach.
Sorry, Henrik, it's not audible. There's a lot of echo.
Yeah, there's some echo. I don't know. There's someone who is using the speaker, so we are having echoes. Now it's better. Okay, so just to rephrase my question, so to make the points, I think non-functional requirement needs to be defined as early as possible, and I really like the fact that smart, being able to have smart requirements where you have to trace, measure, and so on. So when you have a greenfield application, Because I think a way of collecting the right NFR is to have the right tool set. So monitoring, APM product obviously will help us quite a lot, having synthetic monitoring, RAM data, profiling, whatever. But when you have a greenfield application, I'm launching a new services, and I may not have the experience or discovering on how the user is interacting. So what would be your recommended approach to properly define the right smart NFR?
Sure, sure. So there are two aspects, depending when it comes to greenfield application. One of the key aspects is also to look into the industry benchmarks, industry or product benchmarks that are available, right? So if you look into any of the new service or a technology that you are building, there are a lot of industry benchmarks that are available, which can be used as a source of truth. That's one aspect of it. Two, for any application at an enterprise level, there are few NFR guidelines that are defined, right? If that is not given, it's very critical that at an enterprise level, there are NFRs defined. Probably if it is a UI-based application, we know what is the end-to-end typical for that enterprise is 3 seconds as the standard SLA or 4 seconds as the standard SLA, right? Or is something that can be taken from the enterprise level SLA or from industry or from some of the benchmarks that are available, right? So those are the two sources where you can take the information, use that to define or validate the NFR. And when you do that for the first time, I think it's taking those data, use that as input to define your NFRs, and probably once you test, validate, and get the right set of data, it will help us to see if there are any changes that needs to be made to the NFRs that you have defined, right? And then accordingly make changes. So 5 seconds might be a standard SLA for an enterprise application, but for if you are developing a reporting application and it takes 8 seconds or 10 seconds to process, you take 5 seconds as an SLA, validate it for a greenfield application, and validate with the architects on what is the best optimization that can be done. And at the end of the day, if it comes down to eight is the thing that we will not be able to do much. And if the business is fine with that, that yes, 8 seconds is still fine, acceptable within the acceptable limits, then probably use that as a base to move forward, right? So that's how we normally work with whenever we don't for any greenfield application, whenever there is no standard NFRs available or we don't have data from production, use industry benchmarks, use similar applications that you have developed in the past with the same enterprise, or use the enterprise SLAs as a basic parameter to start with and refine it as you go as you develop your application. And this is something that we are facing with all microservices-based applications, right? So any new microservices that you define, while there is a standard SLA which is defined as 2 seconds, each microservice is unique, and they'll not be able to meet those 2 second SLAs, right? And that's where you test, validate, and then see what would be the rating. So some of them will be able to perform within 1 second. Some of them will take more than 3 seconds to process. So based on the service that you work on, you take the enterprise SLA as the base thing, validate it, and if there are if it can't be fine tuned beyond a certain point, work with the architects, work with the business stakeholders, get an approval for the new thing because of the technology limitation, because of the infrastructure limitation, whatever it is, right? Get the sign off so that everyone is on the same page for any of the newer areas.
And one thing I from the description of the smart NFR, I think what a lot of time there are requirements that we have issues to measure. It happens quite a lot, in fact. Do you suggest to have like a sort of how can we name that? Let's say non-functional, like test-driven development, but not test-driven. It's going to be like non-functional requirement driven development, where you are building the side of a development a way of collecting or measuring the KPI that you are struggling to measure. That will be a way of making sure that we are not missing any important indicators that will help us to measure or validate the performance. Do you think that
Yes,
could be?
that's right. Yeah. So performance-driven development is one of the key things, right? For any greenfield application, performance-driven development is a key area, right? Where you work along with the development team, and that's one of the key reasons where you'll be able to break down your business NFRs into your application and component NFRs, right? That's one of the key aspect that needs to be done. And once you have those base component level NFRs defined, it's more like performance-driven development where you can work with the development team, see what is the best that you can get, and if there are challenges, redo or change your application architecture or change your application code to ensure that it meets those defined SLAs or SLIs or SLOs, right? So that's one of the critical aspects in performance, like you rightly pointed out, performance-driven development will help us do that. And if we have the right set of component level NFRs, we'll be able to validate and certify during the development phases. So it's not, you don't need to wait until the entire application is done to do it. It needs to be part of your unit level testing value, where the developers can, once they finalize the code, they can validate it. We can run a single user test, we can run an early performance test, validate how the service is performing, and refine the NFRs if that is required. And some of those services, you'll be able to identify at the early stages that yes, this is a resource intensive service and it requires, it might not fall into your normal regular NFRs or regular SLAs that you're tracking, and it requires some additional approvals or plus or minus 10-15% additional time to process it.
Thanks. Emma, Arinder, Ramya, do you have any questions for Hari?
So, am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. So, Hari, for the presentation, and one quick question. See, today more and more clients are looking at primarily resilience, which is probably the hottest word across, in every sector that we're hearing. So, how does this? You talked about net promoter scores, right, in one of the first slides. How does that change when when you actually now the clients are looking for resilience and reliability?
From an NFR standpoint, I think when we get into the components, there are two key components that we need to focus on. One, performance and efficiency. The second is on reliability and availability, right? So those are the two key NFRs that we need to start focusing on. And more from a technology aspect of it, I think ensuring application without any failures is one of the key aspects, right? So resilience is one of the key aspects which needs to be validated, and with the acceptable availability of the application, mean time to fix, mean time to recover, or some of the other parameters that you need to collect as part of your overall NFR gathering exercise, right, from different stakeholders, and ensure that that is also getting defined. Right? One of the key thing is on how do you. Sorry, I'm hearing some echoes. Is it better?
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the key thing is on validating the application from a resiliency standpoint, right? If any of your application is down, that will have a direct impact on your customer experience, and if it goes down on a holiday readiness or on your peak day, that will have a wider impact and will bring down your NPS, right? So it's one of the critical factor is continuously validate how the application is performing in production, capture the data, what is the components that are failing, what are the components or the infrastructure where you are running high on CPU, running high on memory. You use that data to as one of the key things. With the SRE coming in, I think the role of SRE is also to constantly monitor what is changing in production, what are the key components that are going beyond the SLAs, track that data, use it for your application. Right? So any new feature or development will be put on hold if you are seeing a lot of performance issues in production. Right? Until all these issues are fixed, there should not be any new feature or new application that will get into production until you are within your error budget. Right? So resiliency is one of the key aspects. As part of the NFR, it's also very critical. Performance, efficiency, which is your speed aspect, your reliability, availability, or the critical aspect for a performance tester or an engineer to work with the different stakeholders, define it, right, and then take it forward. Like you rightly pointed out, initially the focus was only on performance and speed, but now the focus has also moved towards resiliency, reliability, and availability as well. Right? Those are the key things that as a performance tester, as an engineer, should start focusing on and get that data right.
Emma or Ramya, do you have any questions?
I have a question. Hendrik, you're able to see the audio and video? I have some trouble logging. Is that okay?
I see you very well, and you have a really nice background, by the way.
Oh, okay. Cool. Thanks for that. Hi, Hari. So that's anyway. I'm just sitting in my kids' room, so you have all this. Okay. So, okay. Sorry, Hendrik, go ahead.
No. Go ahead, please ask your question, please.
Okay, sure. So Hari, the question is, typically, I understand the point, what you were talking about for the greenfield applications, right? So I agree when it comes to greenfield applications, we always had the luxury of doing all the benchmark checking or look for a similar app and then see how it works and then define your NFR. So all that was good. That's all traditional methods that we were taking care of it so far, before DevOps at least, right? So, but now the way we work with so much of a pressure in meeting the agility, do you think we have improvisation in the way NFRs are collected and verified, defined for a greenfield application? So,
Yes. Hey, Ramya.
Hari, I think you're getting echo. So, maybe mute.
I think we lost you. I think you're muted.
Hey,
you're. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So Ramya, I think you're right, and that's one of the key reasons I spoke about the microservices, right? There is a definite shift moving away from monolithic architecture to microservices. Right? Monolithic is where we have all this luxury of getting all those data. In the microservices world, with DevOps, it's also, there are two things that has come down, right? One, you are going to define your NFR at a service level, and all your NFRs from a performance, availability, or reliability is very specific to a microservices level, right? And when you move to a microservices architecture, it is also, and that's one of the key reasons the enterprises, when they move, we work along with the key architects to define what should be some of the key NFRs that you need to define and track at each of those individual service level, right? So this is one of the key things, because once you know what the application architecture that you are going to adopt, whether are you going for a SaaS product, or are you going to adopt a COTS product, or are you going to build your own product, and for each of those individual different types of application, I think it's very critical to define that enterprise SLAs, SLIs, and SLOs, right? That needs to be tracked and defined. So with the change, this is also something that is happening. There is an enterprise level SLAs that are getting defined, and that is used as the primary source for any new services that is getting built, right? And that is taken as the default thing. And when you're not meeting the enterprise SLAs, it goes in for the council to validate and certify why we are not meeting it. And if there are specific kind of services that are getting built, and we know that there will be read-only services, there will be services which will have write, there will be services which is going to pull large amount of data. You'll be able to segregate those services, define that upfront, so that when the developers start developing it, they don't need to work along with different stakeholders to define what that NFR should be for each of their individual services. They can just define or refer to the enterprise or an application-specific NFR that is defined at an enterprise level, and use that for their reference, so that it brings in that agility. It helps us to validate, test, and then move forward